It's funny. Is this your first podcast, Barry?
Yes, yeah.
First podcast, and if we oh man, it's too early. My mouth isn't working this morning. If we rewound the clock to 1998, what we're doing right now isn't even a glimmer in someone's eye, or the idea of being able to connect with someone completely randomly halfway around the world
Yep.
that has a connection to you and your family. It's just this is the people say the world today is terrible and there's all these terrible things in it, but man, there's some really good stuff in it, and this is one of the things that is, to me, unbelievably good.
Well, it's interesting that we can connect. And for me, it's extremely random because, to be honest, I had never heard of you or your podcast or what you guys do until a name twigged in the back of my head one day while I was tinkering on something, listening to a podcast that I listened to. For me, it was serendipitous almost.
Well, I think it is. I think it's certainly the Lord works in very mysterious ways, and I don't even know what you do. I don't know who you are. And this is the great thing about people are going to go, Robbie, this is random, dude. And you'll understand why this is so random, but it's also so amazing at the same time. Barry Cromhout, obviously South African. Why don't you just tell us what you do, and then we can get into this thing of why we're actually here.
Well, I'm a business owner in South Africa. My wife and I run a small filling station business in a little village called Boston. We're in the Natal Midlands, approximately 65 kilometers from Pietermaritzburg, towards the Drakensberg Mountains, into a place called Underberg. I presume you know South Africa, but
Absolutely.
I understand you grew up here.
Yep.
So yes, it's where we've been for the last 22 years, getting this little business going and taking it to where it is. But before that, I was obviously young, unmarried, and adventurous, and I ended up in some interesting places.
That's incredible. And so I got a random DM and from you, Instagram DM. You had obviously figured out where we lived. And so you were tinkering around your shop and you were listening to Andy Stump's podcast.
Firm, yes. I'm a fond listener of his. Something I stumbled across a couple of years ago while also tinkering in my workshop. And I've been listening to him for many years, and here we are.
So you're listening to Andy Stump's podcast. I'm on Andy Stump's podcast. And it was the first podcast that I actually told anybody the story of my grandfather's gun. Because literally on the way up to Montana to do the podcast, I found out that we had found the gun again. Now, if anybody's listening that's like, oh, what happened to the gun? I've done a podcast about the gun already, but on Andy Stump's Cleared Hot podcast, I would recommend go and listen to it because, number one, it's one of the best conversations I've ever had with someone who's not very familiar with hunting in South Africa and African wildlife and the conservation of wildlife around the world. But it's also where I describe in detail everything that happened with my grandfather's gun, because at that time, it had been lost with Delta for 8 months. And we had finally found it on the way up to Montana. And so, Barry, maybe I'll just turn it over to you, because obviously you reached out and had a DM as you're tinkering around in your workshop.
Well, I was, like I said, I was tinkering around, and then when I started listening to your podcast, I thought, oh dear, here we go. Here's another person spinning stories about African bush and being in Africa and sort of the sort of thing that I hear tourists talk about and have for many years, and it's just like, dude, that's not real. But I listened anyway, and uh, I listened to the story of you telling the story about this firearm that got smuggled out of Mozambique, and then and as soon as I heard Mozambique, sort of that tweaked my interest because I have a connection to it from being there. And I listened and I listened, and to be honest, I hadn't even paid much attention to your name, as in Robbie Kroger. The name hadn't even twigged with me. And then you mentioned your grandfather, and then I can't remember if you said his name, Leo Kroger, or if it was just Kroger. And I stopped. I went to my player and I hit the rewind button, and I thought, no, hang on, that's a name I remember. It rings a bell. So I pressed the rewind and I thought, no, hell no, can't be, cannot be. And then then it was sort of, well, good golly, here we are. I know that person. I reached out. I obviously I did not know anything about you or what you guys do, and so I reached out to Andy, and I sent him a DM, and I said, listen, can you try and put me in contact with you? I have something that your grandfather gave me that you might like to have. And excuse me, he messaged back and said, well, I should try and contact you on Instagram. And I thought, well, okay, I've never looked for you on Instagram. So I went and I scrounged around and I saw, okay, here's one Robbie Kroger that sort of might have a connection to the person I am. That's why I reached out and said, are you so-and-so? And that's just where we started. For me, it was like, it was a very strange, surreal circumstance.
Well, Barry, the reason why I wanted you on the podcast is because obviously we run a non-profit, and it isn't, obviously it's something that I do and I cherish and I'm passionate about, and obviously I pour my personal life into it, and I'm very wary of, obviously my kids and my wife and whatnot's not being on that social platform because of things that the aunties can do, and they can be a little crazy. But a lot of people know about my grandfather, and they know about Leo Kroger, and they know about what he did for me and what he meant to me. And I've got his books on my shelf, like right here. This is the green book that he wrote called My Last Kambaku, of all the stories from Mozambique, that was published in Safari Press.
You'll be sending me a copy of that, because I have been looking for that book since the old man told me about it over a cup of coffee.
So obviously we're going to talk about that. And I do. I've actually got 5 copies of it. So Barry, you're more than welcome to bring it. I'll bring one to South Africa when I'm there next. And it's really rare. Obviously, my grandfather died in 2004, and I don't often meet people that knew him. I've only met one other person, Barry, and the other person was Wally Johnson's son. Wally Johnson in California. I haven't actually met him. I just spoke with him on the phone. And so when you reached out and you're like, I met your grandfather and I know your grandfather, I was like, oh my God, I have to talk to this guy. And I have to record it, because it's like, that's to me, that doesn't happen anymore. Right. And so I'd love to understand, like, you obviously have texted me the details, but nobody else knows the details. How did you even end up to meet Leo?
So I went into Mozambique to go and work for a friend of families who were involved in the Mozambican Elephant Reserve. I was 22, I think, 21, 22 at the time. This would have been around end of 1997, heading into 1998. A company called Nkomati Safaris, a chap by the name of Richard Fair. And they were looking for some people to get involved with them down in the Elephant Reserve and trying to reestablish it and get it up and going. It was with an American company. I think the company was called Blanchard International or something like that. They were pumping funds into trying to get the Mozambican elephant reserve set up down in the south. Have you ever been there before?
I haven't. I haven't gone south of Maputo.
So it is south of Maputo. It's on the South African, well, about 60 kilometers. No, my apologies, 30 kilometers north of the South African border, stretching up into the peninsula, which runs to Nyaka Island. And when we started there was nothing. We were involved with setting up, getting the which fence line was it, the northeastern boundary line set up along the Rio de Maputo, which is the South African Pongola River, where it flows into the bay, a place called Bella Vista and Salamanca. And so I was involved with establishing the establishment of that fence line, as well as establishing of camps. And so it was for me a big adventure. And the company that my dad worked for in South Africa, they have a timber company in Swaziland. And through the Swaziland company, they were putting feelers into Mozambique as to try and get into the hardwood timber market in Mozambique and exporting timber products into Europe. And they obviously heard that I was already in Mozambique and working there, and I had a relationship with me. So they approached me and asked me if I'd like to get involved with them, and which I grabbed with two hands gladfully.
Sure.
And so I left Richard and Colette and down in the elephant reserve and moved on to trying to set up and get this timber concession and sawmilling operation set up in a place called Fuman Makwakwa, which is north of Maputo, sort of northwest of Shai. And yeah, so I was brought into to getting this going quite late into the setup of it. And so they had obviously had a lot to do with Leo before I was brought in. I met.
So you think they had already made contact with him? They made contact. They made contact with Leo and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely, there had been negotiations for this concession for quite some time before I was brought in, and when I got involved, it was more or less to come in and get the ground operation going. So I was sent to a meeting with Mr. Kroger at his house, and to basically get it in Maputo. I can't remember the street name, but it was a beautiful old house.
It was on Embassy Row. It was on Embassy Row, 3 stories high, beautiful home.
It was I remember it was where most of the embassies were. I can't remember the street name. And so I went and had a cup of coffee with him, and we spoke about the sawmilling operation and all of his adventures up the not all of it, some of his adventures up there. And we touched on a bit of hunting, because hunting is where I grew up in hunting, so I have a background there. And he introduced me to his assistant. I think his name was Ibrahim. And Ibrahim and I had to make arrangements to get a vehicle up to Fuman. It was an old Isuzu pickup, and so that was on our first meeting. But in that first meeting, he made the most impressions on me, because we didn't get into any details, but he was telling me about his life as and being. I think he said he had been involved in 3 wars or
world wars. Yeah,
3 world wars that he had, and it was in East Europe. It was I think Germany, and as well as in Mozambique, and
Yep.
being involved in these conflicts and
Yeah,
having
essentially
to
two world wars between Germany and northern China, and then obviously moved to Mozambique and went through a revolution in Mozambique, and then went through multiple revolutions in northern China with the Japanese occupation, German occupation, and Chinese occupation.
Now, unfortunately, my history, it was over my head. I didn't
Where
have
did do you remember where you sat with him in the house?
It was a living room. There were many. Yeah. It was a living room with sort of couches.
Big leather back chair, big high leather back chair. Did he sit in a big high leather back chair?
Yes,
yeah.
in a corner.
Mm-hmm.
I just remember very strong coffee. It was strong coffee. So, and he told me about his book and the Last Kambako, and that name has stuck in the back of my head for forever. Now, and there's stories where there are times when I've mentioned it to old hunters that I've crossed paths with before, and they have known him as well. There was an old man that lived in the village where we're here called Zane Langman. He was a hunter out of Zambia. He unfortunately passed away a few years ago, and he knew of your grandfather and spoke very highly of him. And so yes, coming back to our meeting there, the first meeting, the impression that he made was just incredible. And he spoke of duck hunting, and he always said, no, when I get settled up in for mine, he'll come up and he'll take me to go and shoot ducks in some of his special holes and places that he knew.
He loved duck hunting. Like it was the thing that he missed the most. Like not even like he enjoyed big game hunting, he enjoyed elephant hunting, but when the revolution hit, obviously all his guns got taken away from him, and the thing that he missed the most was going and getting a couple of ducks for dinner kind of scenario. And because he did it as a kid in China.
Yes.
And so when things started relaxing and the Civil War disappeared and whatnot, he managed to smuggle a shotgun and shotgun shells back into Mozambique. And the driver, the famous story was that they went back to one of the old holes, 20 years later, 30 years, no, it wasn't 30 years later, it was probably around 20 years later, like when you were there, like 96, 97, 98-ish. And they were sitting in the swamp, took little chairs with them, and the driver, chauffeur, whether it was Ibrahim or the guy that looked after him, they said they couldn't see the water because the mosquitoes were so thick. And they didn't see a single duck, obviously, because everything had been eaten. But that was his life. Like he loved duck hunting, man.
So he spoke of duck hunting and bird hunting. And as I said, he said that when I got settled up there, he would take me and show me some of his favorite duck hunting spots in around Manjakas. The village of Manjakas was built up on a hill which looked over a massive lake. And Manjakas was one of the places that he mentioned. And then also just outside of Fuman Makwakwa, heading from the village to where the forests were that we were harvesting in, he said there were some places there, and I got stuck one night in one of those holes, and there were definitely ducks there, a lot of white-faced, what we call the white-faced whistling ducks. There were plenty of them around, and I think spurwing. I don't think I ever saw any Egyptian geese, but spurwing geese and white-faced ducks. But I'm really sad that I never ever got that opportunity to meet up with him up there. But yeah, he was, the stories that he told. For the life of me, I can't recall the stories, but he just made such an impression on me. It was absolutely.
It's so funny that in the initial. in the initial business relationship with you, he just decided he was just going to tell you stories about hunting and his adventures and stuff?
I, I don't know why. It was sort of like he wanted to get out and go and hunt, and he was looking
Yeah.
for someone to go hunting with. And that's sort of the impression I got. Yeah, it was a very interesting an interesting meeting. Yeah, I I don't recall his house looking at all like a professional hunter's house that you would, with trophies on the walls and things like that. It was very modest, if I must admit. It wasn't as if it was a house that somebody was bragging in about their adventures and everything. But I just got the feeling that he wanted to tell stories, and it, I wish I could go back and spend a few more hours there, because it was just it was impressionable, if I can say that.
Yeah, it's so funny that, the whole I knew very little of the business. I knew obviously we were trying to get out of everything. I knew I didn't understand whether it was owned or concessioned or anything like that, but I knew we had a sawmill. I knew we had a boat. Did the ship come with the concession?
No. He spoke of a boat I think it was in Maputo, but no, that wasn't included in any deals.
Okay, there was a huge ship. That I remember. I'll have to dig back and find photos of them christening it. I can't remember the name of the boat now, but they christened it, and it was part of the sawmill operation, and it moved, all the logs and whatnot. Man, that's amazing. And so that was the first meeting. You had a second meeting with him.
The second time was I met up with him and Ibrahim and I headed off north to go, and he went to go and introduce me to the chef de poste, the chief of the at Manjakaz, as well as an appointment with the Department of Agriculture, Forestries and Fishing in Shai to sign over concessions, all the concession paperwork for the area that was under concession.
So the deal got done.
Correct. Deal was done. I forget dates, but this was sort of, I think it was around July 1998, if my memory serves me right. It was probably around July 98 that I first went up there and moved up there. For me, it was an adventure of a lifetime, especially at my age. It was an awesome, amazing opportunity. Absolutely amazing opportunity.
And then in that first meeting, he gave you his business card?
Yes, in fact. And
how do you still have his business card?
He made an impression on me. There it is. That's it.
And so if you're not watching this on YouTube, the card says, all it says, it doesn't have an address, it doesn't have a phone number, it doesn't have anything. It just says Leo Kroger, somewhere in Africa. Yeah, Barry, look here.
Snap.
I got the same one. And it's made of wood. That's the cool thing.
So it's a kiot, sliced kiot. I've got it written on the back because he and I spoke about the different timbers that they were harvesting, and that's why he gave me the card, was because they used to make veneer, and this is what they called kiot. So it's a common South African tree as well, and this is one of the products that they exported into Europe. Was exactly this. So,
amazing.
But that's what I wanted to give to you. I said, I've got this. We might want it.
Well, you keep it. I'll trade you. I'll trade you a book. I'll trade you a book because I've only got two of them. I've literally only got two of them.
Okay.
This is it. I'll trade you a book for the business card.
Okay. Yeah, like I said, the old man made an impression on me, and he was a true adventurer, and you could tell from his face that he had known some hardships, but he was tough. That man was tough. I can tell you that much. He was a tough man. when he must have been, I don't know his age, but I reckon he must have been in his mid 80s.
Oh, he was 86. Yeah, he was probably 86, 87 when you met him. Yeah.
There we go. So he was in his mid 80s, and no, he was, you could see this man was, he is as tough as can be.
When I went back in 2004 before he died, he was in the hospital in Johannesburg, and the window was open to his hospital room. He was smoking in his hospital bed. I was like, "You're not allowed to smoke in here. It's a hospital." He's like, "I don't give a shit. Like, I've been smoking since I was 12 years old. I'm 91 now. What are they going to do?" And literally the nurses were just like, "Just close the door." You're like, okay. And then you open the little fridge in the hospital room, and it was full of gin and tonic.
So I remember the cigarettes he smoked. They were Havana cigarros, and they came in a tiny little package, and it was like a brown paper packaging, and they were tiny. They were short. They were probably, I don't know, less than 3 inches in length. And the distinct thing about them is there were 25 in a packet, and that's what he smoked. They were. I distinctly remember that.
Crazy, man. Absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
Well, Barry, thank you, man. I really just thank you. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for reaching out.
No, like I said, he made an impression on me. There was something about this old man that just he just made an impression. And the stories about the hunting side and the elephant and the elephant in the forests where we were harvesting timber. They obviously hunted a lot of elephant up there. And I had a guy that worked in the house. His name was Samuel, or Samson in English, and he told me stories of the hunting that they used to do there. And I was going through my photos this morning, and I've got photographs of the cold rooms out the back of the house. And they're these big, they were these big, solid concrete cold rooms. They had no refrigeration or anything. They were just these big, massive, solid rooms, concrete, with these huge wooden doors on the front of them. And he would tell me, Samson, he told me these stories about the elephants that they would cut up, and the meat, how it would all get stored in there and then moved from there down to Maputo and sold in the Maputo area. So the infrastructure was all there, and all the stories pointed to what went on there. It was it's an incredible place. The timber, he had a train. Did you know that?
Mm-mm.
He owned a train. So the timber that they moved out of the forests to the sawmill, it was probably about 35 kilometers. They had their own railway line it was a narrow gauge that ran from the sawmill into the central area within the forest where they used to harvest. And they ran a train. They had a steam locomotive that ran backwards and forwards. And unfortunately, by the time I got there, the scrap merchants had been through. So the railway line itself was gone, and all the locos and carriages. But all the hardwood, they were a macrus, which is Androstachys jacynii. They sleepers were still lying there, and I've got photographs of these railway lines with just lines and lines of sleepers just running off into the forests.
Jeez,
it absolutely amazing place. The history in that place was incredible. Yeah, it's an amazing place. If you'd like, I'll take you there one day.
Yeah, I'd love to see it again. Obviously, we do a little bit of work. We haven't done much in Mozambique yet, but I'd love to see it all again. I'd love to see these places that, he frequented, and yeah, it would be pretty amazing.
Yeah, an amazing place. Yeah, amazing place, amazing people. Yeah, for me, so around that time that there was a movie that came out, Ghost in the Darkness, with about the man-eating lions of Tsavo.
Right.
And so where the sawmill we'd work during the day, and then 5 o'clock would come along and the sawmill would shut operation, and then a cleaning crew would come in and clean up in the sawmill and tidy up for the next shift to start in the morning. And we would run a tiny little generator at that time just for lights, so that people in the sawmilling could see what they were doing to tidy up. And from that time, I would go back to the house, and it was probably, I don't know, 600 to 800 meters from the sawmill to where the house was. And you'd cross the railway line. And at that time, I was reading that book. It was called The Man Eaters of Tsavo, which that movie was based on. And uh, it was quite scary, because I'd have dinner and I'd sit down and read this book, and then I'd go back across the sawmill to go and check, and I'd walk. And one of the chapters in that book, they talked about this long grass and the wind blowing in the grass and walking and crossing a railway line, and it just sort of like, I get cold shivers right now just thinking about this story and reading the book and thinking, oh goodness, where are these lions? Are they going to jump out the bush at me? And it was quite an interesting time.
Oh my gosh,
one's mind tends to run away with you.
That's unbelievable. Well, Barry, thank you, man. Jeez,
we had obviously. It was quite remote. Working up there was quite remote. We were. I'm just trying to think now. The sawmill, to get to the closest telephone was, I think, a 3-hour drive to get to Manjakaz. That was where the closest phone was, and we didn't have, the only communications we had were HF radios, and yeah, so it was very remote, extremely remote.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I'm so glad that you reached out. I'm so glad you got to meet him. He was an absolute, as I grew up, I never got to hunt very much with him. We only did one little dove hunt together in Boksburg, just outside of Benoni. But, now I've got all of his stories. Now I've actually got, his trophies that you would have seen in his house. I've got them here. And I guess now I'm furthering his legacy regarding storytelling around the thing that he loved the most, all around the world. So I'm just super privileged to be in the position I'm in. And my mother, who knew him probably the best because she married his son, sort of gave me the biggest compliment a couple of weeks ago. She was like, "You're just like Leo now." And
those are big shoes to fill.
Oh yeah. But thank you, Barry. Jeez, thank you so much. Please, let's stay in touch. And I look forward to coming to South Africa, bringing you his book so that you've got it in your collection. Okay?
Cool. And then we can, have a beer or two.
100%.